Okay, we are wrapping up our current lunation cycle with this third quarter moon in Virgo. So let's investigate. All right, so our second lunation ruled by Mercury, last week's Gemini full moon being the first. And a key difference here is that Mercury has now moved into Capricorn. So in the week between these lunations, just about halfway through, we had Mercury wrap things up in Sagittarius, its sign of detriment, and make its way into Earth sign Capricorn. Something we should be mindful of too is that for both of these Mercury-ruled lunations that we're experiencing, both are taking place while Mercury is in its retrograde shadow. So the themes that we discussed last week with Mercury being square to Neptune and having a lot of confusion about what's real or where we are trying to sort of transcend into something spiritual without really knowing facts. All of that was sort of amplified by the fact that Mercury is going to be going retrograde over these points again in the coming weeks. Mercury will be stationing, in fact, at the Sagittarius new moon next week following this third quarter moon. So we'll talk much more about what that looks like. Mercury stationing at 8 degrees of Capricorn, moving back to 22 degrees of Sagittarius. But for now, we do know that this third quarter moon sees us or is asking us to release something without actually knowing really what everything is. So let's break things down to kind of get a sense of what's going on. So on the Saturday leading up to this third quarter moon, Mercury enters into a sextile with Saturn. Whatever it is that Mercury is currently in shadow with, we'll be revisiting this sextile to Saturn when it's retrograde. So we might be having questions about what sort of things we're doing in the immediate that are connected to what we're doing in the long term. And perhaps some of this retrograde, as well as this third quarter moon, are asking us to get in touch with where there are disparities between the short term and the long term right now. On Sunday the 3rd, the moon enters Virgo and then immediately opposes Saturn in Pisces. This sort of further suggests that we might be recognizing where we are at odds with things in our life currently. Whatever Mercury dealing with the short term in its retrograde shadow, connected with Saturn about, focusing on the long term, very much direct after a summer of retrograde. We might be in our feelings about how we are maybe not prepared for things, how we are maybe not equipped. Those sort of Virgo themes of having the tools we need, having the space and process, having the kind of recipe down. All of those things may be something that we are sort of caught off guard by or confronted by. On the same day that this happens, we also have Venus square Pluto. Venus, we know, has been home in Libra, and leading up to this has passed the South Node. So there may be something that Venus is finally done with, right? We've talked all about finally wrapping up and gaining closure about whatever was brought up during the Venus retrograde. Venus finally making it home to Libra and having a chance to confront the South Node itself and kind of make that final purge. There may be something coming up for us in this square as Venus finishes up in its own sign that has us feeling confronted about or challenged by some power dynamics in our relationships. Maybe we've let something go that isn't ready to go, or someone on the other side of that connection is going to make a fight for something. Maybe we're challenged within ourselves about where we are able to stand up and fight for something. Either way, there's an unsettling feeling on this day leading up to this third quarter moon. Now, on the day of this third quarter moon, we have the moon making a trine to its ruler Mercury in Capricorn. Again, remembering that Mercury is in its shadow and going to be stationing retrograde next week. There's also a trine to Jupiter, who is currently retrograde, and we'll be wrapping up that retrograde by the end of the year. So perhaps even though we are in this place of confrontation and perhaps conflict, there is something grounding for us here. There is some capacity to maybe root into our own mind, root into our own beliefs, focus on what we can kind of control within ourselves. And on this same day, we also see Venus make its way into Scorpio. So that square to Pluto is extra tense because Venus is leaving its own sign and now making its way into Mars's waters. And Venus is not necessarily the most comfortable there. Venus needs to now start to strategize around where it's able to get what it needs. Perhaps it needs to be a lot more emotionally attuned to the people within its environment in order to kind of feel safe and figure out what it's able to do in those spaces to get what it needs. And similar to what we saw at the full moon, before the moon squares the sun, it squares Mars. So we've been having a lot of Mars energy be part of the lunations lately. And it's kind of a lot. It's kind of stirring up our insides, sort of making us reactive. It might be making us feel like we're being challenged, or the challenge may be very real. Whatever it is, whatever part of your chart it's lighting up, whether it's kind of within you and self-contained, or it's outside of you and involves another or others, it's the feeling that we are bringing into what we are asked to release in this third quarter moon. This is another lunation where we may be asked to kind of zoom out of whatever need for facts we have at this time. Again, another Mercury ruled lunation. Even though Mercury is in Capricorn, we're still seeing a lot of Neptunian influence. And this moon, after it squares the sun, will go on to square Neptune. So we're having more of the same Neptunian influence that we did in blip, 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 as we did at the full moon. And in fact, Neptune will be stationing direct 2 days after this third quarter moon. So that square from the moon to Neptune is its final conversation before it stations direct. Pluto enters one more time for another grounding effect on everything that's going on, as the moon's final act is to enter into trine with Pluto. So there is another opportunity to root within ourselves, tap into our sense of drive, our sense of what our inner psychological landscape looks like at this time, to kind of, again, focus on what we can control, what we know to be true within ourselves, and to act from that place of sort of wholeness and integrity. Wherever we're feeling reactive, wherever we're feeling riled up, wherever we're feeling really uncertain and clouded, making sure to come back to the self wherever we have that capacity to do that. And remember the power that we have within ourselves. Remember what sense of control we have over our actions, over our processes, right? And so whatever's happening outside of us, we are able to tune in within and kind of tap into that sacral energy. I'll keep saying that strength energy. We're going to enter a strength year soon and really get a sense of, so let me just get in touch with what's going on in here. Okay, let me focus on my sort of locus of control here and just like know that. Let me know that very thoroughly. We don't know much about what's going on outside of us, so we can know what's going on here. Okay, let's go ahead, pull some cards and see what we're doing. What are we letting go of? How will we know? Right? And we'll check it out. I'll see you there. Okay, here is our lunar cycle so far. We are starting with the new moon in Scorpio, looking at then the first quarter moon, the full moon. We're going to pull for the third quarter moon now. So if you missed any of these, go ahead, take a second, check them out up here, come back, and we will wrap up this story. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. As we pull for this third quarter moon, there we go. We are looking at what is coming to a close now. And we're also looking at our previous attachment to what is ending, because we are people, we are humans, we are attached to things. They feel safe even when we need to release them. We're looking at how we can make meaning from this process. Because again, we're humans. Not everything means something, but to us, it makes more sense if it does. And lastly, what can we invite in at this time, right? We are entering into a dark moon phase. Once this third quarter moon hits, the light from the moon wanes and moves into darkness. And in that darkness, we can begin to explore what's coming in. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at this Virgo third quarter moon where Neptune is all up in our business? Very curious. All right, I think one more is going to do it. Yeah, that feels good. Okay. What is coming to a close now? Our previous attachment to what is ending. How we can make meaning from this. What we can invite in next. Okay. Okay. Oh my gosh. Wow. Well. All right. Listen. If I haven't been talking about how we are preparing to enter into a strength year, as I just did in that transit portion of this video, this is it. This is the proof. The Chariot year is coming to a close. It is December. The Chariot year is ending. So this is not just connected to this lunation cycle that began with the Scorpio new moon, but this is also us getting a glimpse of how we've moved through this Chariot year, and this Chariot year is now coming to a close. Our journey with working in this realm, with working with these themes, all coming to a close. I think that's very beautiful. Let's recap what we've learned in this Chariot year, what we've been working on. The Chariot is affiliated with Cancer, and the card before it and after are about these sort of relationships between dual processes. So when we see the Chariot, we're looking at the emotional component, we're looking at the conscious and unconscious, we're looking at what is driving us, right? What motivates us to take flight, and what is the steering? Like, who's steering? Who's flying this thing? So we've spent all year focusing on where we're moving in one direction consciously and likely moving in a different direction unconsciously, and how that's creating or has been creating discord for us. We want to think we're going here, and something unconscious within us is actually pulling us sideways, and we get frustrated when we don't go in that direction, or we get frustrated when the path kind of goes that way, and we will say that we don't know why, because it is something within our unconscious space that is not conscious to us yet that we need to get in touch with. So what's coming to a close now is this theme, is whatever lessons we have learned about this, and this does feel very connected to the Neptunian influence, right? Mercury is like, here's what I know, here are the facts, here's what's on paper, and Neptune's like, here's what's beneath, here's what's below, here's what is hiding, here's what you're not paying attention to. And like, wow. Right? And we're at a rave now. So it makes a lot of sense to see this this theme sort of coming up at this time that's been heavily Neptunian for us. This entire lunation cycle has brought in a lot of Neptunian energy. If we remember, the Mars Cazimi that we had just a few days after the Scorpio new moon was in trine to Neptune. So both the Sun and Mars made a trine to Neptune. Now the lunation cycles have been squaring Neptune. Everything in Sagittarius is going to square Neptune. Everything on the mutable axis. We saw the Gemini full moon, right? Everything is going to interact with Neptune in a more harsh way, but we did start this cycle with the intention of, right, the Mars Cazimi sort of bringing our attention to where Neptune influences can be used for maybe like good and not evil is one way to put that, where we can embrace the Neptunian energies rather than fight them, perhaps. Okay, and so this is all something we've been navigating this cycle and all year. Oh, I love when it's just so meta. Okay, so our previous attachment to this Chariot year is the anxiety. Oh, yeah. So this is a very like squaring Neptune card. I don't know what's happening, and I so deeply don't know what's happening that this is all I can imagine now. This is all I can think about, is like the trap of my anxiety. I'm so lost in where I've taken myself, where I've been driving myself without realizing, that I have had no idea about who is steering what. I've been disconnected from my sense of self and who I'm becoming, as well as my emotional foundation. So you might be wondering, what is my attachment to this? Well, we've talked a little bit before about how, and I mentioned it right at the beginning of this, how even if it is an unproductive cycle, even if it is a maladaptive, here's where my therapy is coming in, even if it is a maladaptive like coping mechanism, it is still helping us maintain our status quo as it currently stands, okay? Like, we are all humans doing our best to maintain some sort of very flawed status quo. So even though it's not helpful or productive to us, it is still comforting. It is still the only thing we know, right? We don't know yet how to do this better. We are humans trying to learn. So our attachment to this sort of dysfunctional, like, disconnect is that it's the anxiety we know, right? But better than the anxiety we don't know, right? Like, if I'm gonna have to face an unknown, I'd rather deal with what's already kind of comfortable to me. I'd rather stay trapped in this cycle of anxiety that I'm familiar with than end up veering off in a different direction and like invite in a whole new anxiety. What's that? I don't want that. I can't handle that. So let me stick with what's comfortable. Okay. How we can make meaning from this process. Stop. Stop it, y'all. Stop it. Okay, well, here we go. We're going to make meaning of this by moving into the next, like, assessment of a dual process, right? The Strength card is, as I've stated before, the year we're about to move into. The Strength card is the card that follows the Chariot. So where we have been focusing on some of the conscious, unconscious here, we're now getting a sense of, okay, well, what are my instincts? Like, what's the relationship between my sort of intellect and my instinct? What's going on there? I've gotten a sense of the relationship between my conscious and unconscious. I've understood that, like, there's a lot of anxiety that I am staying with because it is known to me and therefore it is comfortable. Something instinctually needs my attention. Something instinctually, now that I've focused on this and made some progress here, it's time to dig deeper. So we're making meaning of this whole process by understanding, like, oh, okay, so I stick with the discomfort that I know. I stick with the anxiety that I know. It's comforting to me. Discomfort that comforts, you know? We're all oxymorons, right? So looking at this Strength card, making meaning of this and saying, okay, I'm going to get clearer on where my intellect maybe goes into overdrive, right? Let's focus on, like, the conscious me is taking me here. All right, so where is my intellect maybe like a defense mechanism? Where do I over intellectualize perhaps to avoid my instincts? Because if I listened to my instincts, I would have like crashed the car into this thing years ago and, like, you know, veered off in a different direction. But instead I stuck with my logic because my logic wanted to keep me safe, and safety is important to me because we're humans. So the other flip side of this might be like, okay, maybe my instincts are running the show and I'm not leaving a lot of space for my intellect. And that's also another way I'm reaching this place of anxiety. So this can unfold in multiple domains, but we're definitely making meaning by starting to bring our attention to what this relationship looks like here. We're going to spend all of 2024 focusing on this relationship, strengthening this relationship, picking up instincts that have been abandoned, strengthening mental processes that have been frayed because of this anxiety, perhaps. Right? We might be in a place where we no longer trust our intellect or our instincts because this has been going on for so long. All right. So we're going to focus on this. Amazing. What we can invite in at this time. Okay. More swords, right? So I'm getting a sense that we're inviting in compassion for the sort of intellectual structures we've had to create, right? I said over here that it was easier to stick with, like, the pain or the anxiety that we know rather than embrace, like, open ourselves up to new forms of that. That's very destabilizing. And so to invite in some sort of commemoration I was going to say celebration, and that's also a word I want to use here, but it might not feel celebratory. The Queen of Swords is so much about recognizing the painful, uncomfortable experiences we've moved through and how they've ultimately strengthened us to be more self-contained, right? Let's point out too that these triangles are inverted. So this is certainly like a card that represents like intellectual containment. I have moved through the suit of the swords to the extent that I've allowed myself to face all of the pain within the suit, because we know the suit is painful, it's harsh. I've allowed myself to process like what that journey has looked like and what it's meant for me. And ultimately, I've recognized that I do contain a lot of like capacity to hold space for what is happening within my intellectual domain, to hold space for my mental processes, to understand my mental processes, and to be impervious to outside influence here, right? When we move forward and see the king, which we did in our last week's reading, I think that was last week. Yes, it was in this reading. I just showed it to you. So I know it was in this. Yes, it was last week. In our full moon reading. And so when we see the king, that's someone who is sort of like a representation of all of the information. I am like a database for sort of how to handle everything, which like a Nine of Swords could really use, right? Like I don't want to open up to the new anxiety. Okay, the King of Swords is like, well, here's like the whole database on what you would be opening up to so that you don't need to be surprised by anything. Here's all the information. So it's beautiful that we saw the king last week in terms of sort of that outer process happening with the full moon, right? And now we're moving inward into this inner process as we see the third quarter moon sort of pulling us back into ourselves. And so what we can invite in is a crystallization of everything we've moved through, an honoring of the anxiety that we've had to navigate, the discord that we've had to endure just to sort of feel, again, like stable in something, and really just giving credit to ourselves, right? And if we flip this, then maybe we invite this in by kind of, I'm trying to think about like, are we stepping out of a role? Do we actually need to be more vulnerable? Ooh, okay. Is this reverse sort of part of the status quo we're trying to maintain? I have to keep it together all the time. I have to be impervious. Maybe this is actually a call to invite in some vulnerability. And maybe that brings us back to this strength card of like the instincts below the maybe like hyper intellectualization. Maybe this is too much sword stuff. Maybe this is I've been self-contained for too long and I need to allow something else to move in here. And maybe that's the instincts that live below these sort of mental processes. Okay. My goodness. What a meta read. What a timely sort of, we're coming up on the end of the year, right? And so what a timely time. I believe this is our last third quarter moon of the year. We will have a final full moon this year, which will be in Cancer. But for the time being, I believe this is our last third quarter moon because we start the new year. Yes, we start the new year with a third quarter moon. So there is something especially meta about this. This is our last kind of moment of being invited by the moon to close things out. The next time we do this will be in Libra on the 3rd of January, right after Mercury has stationed direct. And so this is kind of that assessment time that we're moving into as we close out the year. So it makes a lot of sense to see these, like, again, like the theme of the year coming up to be moved through, honored, released, and moving into making meaning from this by starting to open up to the strength card and getting a sense of what it's bringing up for us. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe. Next time we'll talk about this Sagittarius new moon at which Mercury will station retrograde. We'll have so much to talk about, so I hope to see you there.